Friends, good afternoon. I think that's 1 o'clock Scottish time and 3 o'clock Malawi time. My name is David Hope-Jones. I'm the Chief Executive of the Scotland-Malawi Partnership. I'll just say a very few quick words as further friends join us, and I'll say a few final words in closing up. But thank you so much for joining this, our second in our series of governance webinars. I will hand over in a moment to Professor Asiyati Chiweza, who will chair this meeting. But just first to say, if you weren't able to join our first meeting on the 27th of October, which launched the series, that was with all three of the co-editors of the forthcoming book and also Lord Jack McConnell. I'll post in the chat box a link for you to be able to catch up with that. But like all good TV series, you don't have to have seen all the episodes before to appreciate each one in turn. So even if you weren't able to be there in October, I'm sure you'll enjoy this afternoon's excellent 60 minutes worth of discussion. Let me, without any further delay, hand you over to the chair for this afternoon, Associate Professor Asiyati Chiweza. Professor Chiweza, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. A very warm welcome to all of you who have joined this webinar today. Thank you very much for coming. And would like you to know that we started these seminars on 27th October when we featured an introduction to the new book, Beyond Impunity, New Directions for Governance in Malawi. Today's webinar marks the start of a series of webinars, each exploring a chapter in greater detail. And these webinars are being held under the auspices of the Scotland-Malawi Partnership that has had a long-held aspiration to facilitate meaningful dialogue in the area of governance strengthening. So between today and May 2022, the Scotland-Malawi Partnership will host a series of 6 seminars which relate to the remaining chapters in the book. Now, a little bit about the book itself is that it was inspired by the momentous and unique events of 2019-2020 in Malawi, where for the first time in the history of sub-Saharan Africa, a flawed presidential election was invalidated by 5 constitutional court judges, and where the opposition then won the rerun poll. So this book, Beyond Impunity, is an edited book that has 15 chapters, which were written by 25 authors. And we do give credit to the authors who drafted their chapters at a very challenging time in mid-2020 when Malawi was facing the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. We are also very much indebted to the anonymous peer reviewers, both local and international, who freely gave of their time and expertise to ensure that the chapters reach the highest possible standard. It is important to recognize that the core of this series of webinars is a Malawian-led endeavor and entirely non-governmental in nature. Scotland only became involved after the book had been almost entirely completed. So the partnership's role has simply been to offer modest financial support and to engage people in meaningful two-way sharing. It has had no influence over either the content of this book or these webinars. Now, the book takes a comprehensive look at Malawi's multi-party democracy and governance since 1994. And it's been heralded as a comprehensive, compelling, and accessible account, bringing together critical insights on what has gone wrong while offering lessons and a sense of hope for a better future. So the analysis in the book has been up to 2020. In this webinar today, Dr. Henry Chingaipe will give us an overview of his chapter. And the title of the chapter is A Decade of Governance as Roving Banditry, the Political Economy of Public Finance Management in Malawi, from 2010 to 2020. Now, Dr. Henry Chingaipe is a Malawian political scientist, trained at the universities of Malawi, Cambridge, and York. He specializes in political economy of governance and development and is a career researcher. Currently, he's growing and managing an outfit called Institute for Policy Research and Social Empowerment, which focuses on research, programming, consultancy, and advisory services in the fields of politics, governance, and development. Dr. Henry Chingaipe is also a Commonwealth scholar. He is an honorary research fellow of the University of Manchester He's a member of the National Planning Commission, Policy and Projects Committee, but he's also a member of the Presidential Task Force on Review of Public Service Systems. Now, before I hand over to Dr. Chingaipe, let me just cover some of the essential administration points. As I am talking now, please feel free to introduce yourself in a sentence, and don't be shy about sending a direct message to others to make useful connections through the chat. After the speaker, Dr. Chingaipe, there will be 22 minutes of open discussion, questions and answers, and reflections. Please put any questions and comments in the chat box. If you're active, you may also tweet through the discussion using @Scotland Malawi and @Malawi-Scotland. I would also like you to know that this webinar is being recorded as a video and will go up online soon after the recording and any copies of presentations that we receive. Now, let me hand over to you, to Dr. Chingaipe. Dr. Chingaipe, you have the floor.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So as I was saying, I will take a few minutes to go over the chapter just to highlight a few things. But before I do that, I thought that I should enter a word of recognition and acknowledgement that I was introduced to public financial management as a third-year undergraduate student, and the lecturer was the Asiyati Chiweza, at that time early in her career as a lecturer. And I grew up to develop interest in that field, although I do not necessarily work on that field. But when this book project came on board, I thought that I could reflect on this subject in view of the experience that the country has undergone in the last 10 years. And so I have done a chapter that is looking at the 10 years, and it is essentially looking at characterizing governance during that decade. And I do so from a point of view of public finance mismanagement. I am not even pretending that we should be talking about public finance management. The period was characterized by gross mismanagement of public finances, and I thought we could just go straight at calling it what it was. When you think about public finance management, or indeed mismanagement in that period, perhaps an apt summary of the experience is found in what the former director, the former budget director, Mr. Pompeo, had said in one of his interviews with a journalist that was following up a story, the so-called Cashgate. And he said that the whole entire government of Malawi is a criminal enterprise. That is what he discovered. And when you look at the public finance mismanagement instances, episodes, systems, syndicates, and everything during that period, it is very difficult to disagree with Mr. Pompeo that the government appeared to be like a criminal enterprise. So criminalization of the state, at whose center was the public finance mismanagement. So in this overview, in the next few minutes, I will just provide you with a quick context and highlight public finance management in terms of definition and its centrality to statecraft. Then I will say a few things about the metaphor of the roving banditry and its application to public finance management. I will illustrate the opportunity cost of public finance mismanagement in Malawi during the period, but using one financial year figures, and then mismanagement across the public finance management chain. So highlighting the public finance management chain and showing how public finance mismanagement happens along that chain. Finally, I will provide key elements of a political economy analysis explanation of public finance management in Malawi, and then highlight some conclusions or implications or recommendations at a very good level. So in terms of context, Asiyati has indicated that the book we have worked out was motivated by what happened in 2019 and 2020. And the departing point for the chapter is the recognition of the inaugural speech of President Chiweza, which was delivered on the 6th of July 2020. In my view, that marked the zenith of a critical juncture. A juncture in the sense that all of us here had expectations of change, particularly in the totality of configuration of power and the exercise of administrative authority. Everyone expected change in that regard. There was also an expectation that maybe for the first time in this country, we are going to get a government or a political regime that will be able to simultaneously deliver democratic governance and socio-economic transformation. Why were these expectations actually the apex of the moment? It's probably because over the last 10 years or so, beginning perhaps after the 2009 general election that gave President Mutharika a landslide, there has been growing dissatisfaction with the impunity and politics of exclusion. I do not want to do a very long speech on this issue, but when you read and listen to people trying to do characterization of this period in terms of political governance, many agree that the kind of political leadership we got in the decades came close to country club leadership. Leaders that had a high concern for their people and the relationships. And when we speak about their people, we are talking of people that are close to them in terms of political affiliation and in terms of tribal identity, and sometimes in terms of religious and regional locations. Low concern for transformative results for society as a whole, and a very high degree of love for leisure, fanfare, and ceremony. These things actually amounted to dissatisfaction among the public, and that caused the agitation going forward. The second issue was the inability of the political regimes to deliver democracy and development simultaneously. Our history is such that from 1966, when we became a republic, we have had political regimes that have been unable to deliver simultaneously democratic governance and development. In the worst case situations, we have had regimes that have delivered no democracy and no development. In the best scenarios, maybe we have had regimes that have done better on the democracy, but have traded that off with the socio-economic transformation. And for some, they have done better in terms of engineering some socio-economic transformation, but at the expense of democratic governance. So it's been a trade-off. And so in 2019, 2020, the expectation going together with the critical juncture was that perhaps we were going to get a political leadership that you would be able to deliver both the democratic governance as well as the socio-economic development. 1 year down the line, I don't know what people think, whether they still see the possibility of a simultaneous delivery on those objectives. But also there has been growing concerns about corruption. You have on that graph the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index up to 2020, and you see the bars rising, falling, rising, but generally remaining high, indicating that people were seeing that corruption was a big problem. On the other side, you see a graph about control of corruption. And in that graph, what is striking is that that graph, the measures have always been below zero, which means that our efforts at anti-corruption have been suboptimal or through. But when you look at the bars, you see that in our West situation, although it was bad, there were years when perhaps the anti-corruption seemed to be picking up, but it was not enough. So that's the context that forms, the basis of the paper. In the inaugural speech of the president, he identified 8 types of rubble. And when you look at those types of rubble, you see that each one of them implies public finance management, corruption, laziness, passivism, donor dependency, regionalism, negativity, professionalism, and incompetence. All of those things have effects that directly relate to public finance management. And that suggests that in order to deliver the greatest good for the greatest numbers in our country, it all depends on the quality of public finance management. What do we mean by public finance management in this context? Talking about ability of the state or of the government to mobilize, to manage, to prudently spend, and also enforce accountability for public resources. In other words, it goes across the chain. The literature shows us that the state of public finance management bestows on the state its character. So how does the state relate with money? The way it does so in terms of mobilization, in terms of spending, managing, and how it enforces accountability for it, will make the state either be predatory, patrimonial, be described as kleptocratic, fragile, or weak. All these adjectives have been used to describe a suboptimal nature of states in terms of public finance management. On the good side, states have been described as developmental, effective, people-centered, and so on. So when we come to the characterization of the Malawi state during the decade as the roving banditry, we want to highlight the fact that at least from the political science literature, we know that all states are bandits. The difference is whether they behave as stationary bandits or as roving bandits. And I characterize the Malawian state in the last decade from a public finance management point of view as roving banditry. So stationary bandits in the literature, basically these strong men that are able to establish taxation systems for extraction of resources. They are able to fend off other people, and they protect the access, the economic surplus of the population, and also provide a minimum amount of public goods and services. Roving banditry, it means that the state is carrying out intense extraction of the economic surplus from the population using a varied set of schemes, including forms of taxation, plunder the populations and their resources, mainly for the exclusive benefit of those that man the state, and they do so with a high sense of impunity. Roving bandits have very short time horizons. They have no incentive for investing in public goods and services to enable the captive population to continue their economic activities and prosper. So they just want to extract for their personal benefits largely. So when you apply the metaphor of roving banditry to public finance management in Malawi between 2010 and 2020, we are using this basically to describe a phenomenon of competitive theft of public resources, which included money and assets, and it involved the state elites, both politicians and bureaucrats, and also many of their supporters and the beneficiaries. And they did this competitive theft of public resources through multiple schemes that helped them to privatize public resources. In the short periods, they had control of the levers of power of the state. And because of the short time horizon, people were competing to maximize the amount of loot, the amount of benefits that they could carve out from the state. So there are many examples of, or many stories of public finance mismanagement in Malawi. Nearly every week there will be one or two articles in the mainstream media about public finance mismanagement. But I thought that for this presentation, we could just do a quick highlight of the opportunity cost of public finance mismanagement. And in the paper, I just take one financial year, 2014-2015 financial year, and I just take two amounts that had been published as the money that had been abused in the public service. So there was a 90 billion Malawian kwacha that was misappropriated between 2009 and April 2010. This was during President Bingu's second term. And it was followed by another amount of money, 20 billion kwacha, that was misappropriated in 6 months only, when government and the public base were entrusted to President Chiweza and her People's Party. So what I do there is to use the cost figures presented in the national budget of that year, just to illustrate some opportunity costs. And for this presentation, I just want to highlight opportunity cost in the health sector. So the total amount of money misappropriated, we look at 110 billion. And with that money, government of Malawi would have trained 40,000 medical doctors at College of Medicine over a period of 5 years. Or they could have constructed 314 health centers, each with about 5 new houses for health workers. Or they could effectively have supported the delivery of services in all government health facilities for more than 2 years, because in that year, the budget for the health sector was 69 billion. And so with 110, they could have done about 2 years of support to the health sector. With a 20 billion kwacha that was misappropriated during the 6 months of Joyce Banda's term, that 20 billion was enough to provide all health services in Nsanje district for 8 years, looking at the amount of money that was allocated for Nsanje for health services in that year. The 110 billion was worth 440 years of health services in Nsanje at the cost prices of 2014. So when you look at the public finances that are mismanaged, misused, or abused in terms of opportunity costs, you can begin to see how much in terms of development is actually lost to public finance mismanagement. So public finance mismanagement, basically, we just want to highlight 3 main stages, and that's the chain. And at each stage, money is mismanaged, money is abused, money is lost through all sorts of schemes. Very often in this country, people, when they speak about public finance management, they look at the expenditure side. They're just looking at money that had to be spent, but they are not looking at how public money is being mismanaged through budget allocations. They are not looking at how public money is being misused, being abused, or being lost through revenue mobilization stages. So, for example, in revenue mobilization, we contract domestic and international loans to add to our resources for purposes of running government projects and development. But rarely are we raising the questions whether we are contracting loans that are not toxic. Because we know that when we contract a loan, we enter into a statutory obligation to pay back this loan and the payment becomes part of statutory expenditure, which means we are already spending money that we'll get in future, and we are denying ourselves opportunities for doing with that money something better for the country. It is worse when we contract the loans and we don't use them for the intended purposes, as we did in Tractorgate, as we have done with the money we have borrowed for building security or houses for security agencies and so on. All of that is money borrowed, spent, abused, mismanaged. It's public money, and we will continue to pay back that loan, and therefore will affect budget allocation as well as budget expenditure. So there's also loss of tax revenue, particularly when we look at the minerals sector. We do not have a framework for public finance management that actually optimizes the amounts of revenue that we can get from the resources, how to manage them and deploy them to produce public goods and services for the greatest numbers of people in society. So by design, we are already mismanaging. And mismanagement of revenues at source, this is also a big problem. In fact, in this country, we don't talk about auditing revenues, but we have so many multiple streams through which government collects revenue for public use. We have levies on fuel, but no one has seen an audit report, for example, marriage levy, and so on. We have so many other streams other than direct taxation. And money is spent at source, is unaccounted for. Sometimes even the allocation processes for those monies coming from those streams is very opaque. When you come to budget allocation, allocation of resources driven by patronage, lots of examples, populist and non-strategic allocation of resources, allocating money, a lot of money to things that have no meaningful impact in terms of development and are just expenditures that please people for political reasons. Allocations to imaginary political projects, and basically money just being stolen without any accountability. And when you come to budget expenditure, the key issue is about audit, or is about oversight of the expenditures. And the audits are done, but the Auditor General in each report is complaining about non-compliance. Again, you have ineffective parliamentary oversight. They try, but it's very ineffective because their mandate is also secure. During the decade, there was a very widespread perception of a captured and corruption bureau, and it was, according to many accounts, perhaps focusing on matters of the past, and they left people to continue doing corruptive practices in the present, and they couldn't attend to them very quickly because of political considerations. So the narrative goes. And then slow judicial processes. It takes too long to conclude just one case. And that has the implications because it creates the perception that you have still public money. By the time they are getting due, it's too late because the processes are very slow. So perhaps the questions, why did the reforms that have been attempted over the years not yield the kind of public finance management that was desirable throughout the decade? Why public monies were mismanaged, pilfered out of the system, and remained unaccounted for despite yearly recommendations by the Auditor General and a whole lot of the reforms? Okay. So the pervasiveness of public finance management and the persistent non-compliance with rules and regulations show that the formal rules for managing public finances in Malawi have been mostly ineffective. And if the formal rules have been ineffective, it means that there is a set of informal rules that is actually being followed through by the people that should have been following the formal rules. So basically, the argument in the paper in the chapter is that formal rules were supplanted by competing informal rules that were politically engineered to enable ruling politicians and their bureaucratic associates associates maximize personal benefits from the positions that they held. Informal rules also reinforced a political logic of feeding off the state and reinforced the notion of politics of the belly. The supplanting of formal rules and good practices in public finance management was also enabled by three core factors. The first one being a redefinition of national interests away from the collective good. And the second, the weakening of accountability through appointive bureaucracies, and also a docile citizenry that hardly engaged in social accountability. And when they did, they raised their voices in a way that did not actually achieve any accountability, as the elites, political and bureaucratic, just didn't pay any attention. So the argument is that the interests, elements of capture and the repurposing of the state are at the core of public finance mismanagement. People compete to take charge and control of the state, not necessarily to use the state to deliver public goods and services, but maximize the amount of resources and benefits that they can carve out from the state. And most public finance mismanagement during the decade was not random at all. It was very, very systematized. When you look at the Auditor General's reports, special audit reports, Ombudsman's reports, and so on, you see clear systematization of schemes to steal public money from wherever the money was in the public sector.
Henry,
the most serious one, dubious procurement processes and collusion, okay, conspiracy to feed off the state, and also many other schemes. Appointive bureaucracies, just talking of people, perhaps from nowhere, being appointed into strategic positions, not necessarily that they have some particular expertise or insight to contribute to making the state work better, but because either they are very compliant to their political masters so that they can be used to siphon off resources or engineer some schemes and so on, to enable the mismanagement of public resources. Weak social accountability mechanisms. There too, as I said, we have tried as a country. I think there are loud voices, but we are still not yet achieving accountability. And in many cases, civic actors are also constrained by so many other factors. So I make a few broad recommendations. One is the reform of politics, in particular how political power is configured and exercised. That has direct implications on public finance management or mismanagement. There is need for specific institutional reforms, some of which I outline in the paper, but in particular, we need to focus on Parliament, the Auditor General, and in some ways also the Anti-Corruption Bureau. We need to review and reform public procurement because there are so many schemes that are enabled under the current framework, all of which lead to gross public finance mismanagement. Recruitment and placement of people in the public service, also important as part of public sector reforms, because these become ways through which people are put in strategic positions to enable the buffering of resources. And as I alluded to earlier, maybe revenue audits. I want to conclude, and in conclusion, I want to quote the current Director General of the Anti-Corruption Bureau. But she made this statement when she was serving as the ombudsman. And she said, to effectively deal with the fraud and abuse of public resources and the institutionalized impunity that goes with it, there is need for a good conspiracy of governance and law enforcement institutions. People cannot continue to work in the cycles and hope that they will be able to deal with the menace of public finance management in Malawi. Because as we are learning, it is actually the issue for which people compete to hold political executive power in the country. Asiyati.
Thank you very much, Henry, for that reflective and moving presentation. Now, I would like all our participants to know that each webinar has a Scottish respondent, and we are delighted this month to have Sir Goudie as our respondent. Now, Sir Goudie has been a lawyer in private practice, specializing in corporate law, having been the senior partner of one of Scotland's largest law firms. Throughout his career, he's been involved with third sector organizations, universities, and public policy. He helped to create governance codes for UK universities, while he was the chair of all chairs of UK universities. He also advised the World Bank about governance issues, particularly in regard to India. And he's been a long-standing supporter of governance strengthening initiatives between Malawi and Scotland. Sir Goudie, it is a great pleasure to have you as our Scottish respondent today. You have the floor, Sir Goudie.
Thank you very much indeed, and good afternoon. I'm really delighted to be with you. You must understand that I'm actually an understudy because Professor Andrew Goudie had hoped to be able to be involved in this session, but had to step back from it fairly recently. So I'm a layman in the midst of very distinguished academics, but I'm particularly delighted that the circumstances allow me to be engaged with Henry again, because he and I have collaborated in previous years around governance issues. I can't let my introduction end before I say to you that today is, of course, St. Andrew's Day, the official national day of Scotland. I'm afraid I don't have a saltire behind me, but this is a day that we celebrate for our patron saint, St. Andrew, who is, of course, also the patron saint of Greece and Russia and other countries. Sharing is part of the rhetoric of our age. The reality is that actually it is often more rhetoric than reality, which is why the relationship between Malawi and Scotland is of particular importance, because it's real. And I think today's seminar is a good exemplar of the vivid, purposeful relationship between our two countries. So my thanks to the Scotland-Malawi Partnership in creating this seminar series to allow us to explore the considerable breadth and reach of Beyond Impunity. In his foreword, Paul Zaleza, writes, "This book exudes a sense of hope, and in frequently powerful writing, the editors and contributors describe the path followed, largely since independence, which has led to the present day circumstances around governance in Malawi in its broadest description." And I have to say, the sense of hope is one that I would share as well. I think it is so compelling that President Lazarus Chakwera described graphically the need to clear away the rubble. I mean, that is an image that I'm sure all of us can hold on to very easily. And I should say to you, we still need bulldozers in the UK. It's most certainly not for me or Andrew Goudie to comment on how Malawi should define its governance systems and create greater accountability and responsibility. And in Henry's compelling chapter, referring to roving banditry, it is very clear that there is much to be done. However, what has really impressed me about the book and the chapter is the patent honesty in the analysis and the writing. I'm not sure there are many countries, let alone those of us in Scotland, who are brave enough to hold up a mirror to see everything in detail, warts and all. And I suppose that takes me to my first point, returning to the theme of rhetoric and reality. Our political elites have a clear duty to be more honest with their citizens, we in the UK are still periodically referred to as subjects, than our politicians often find instinctively straightforward to be, to be honest with us. And in the days of social media, where politicians are inclined to tweet at any hour of the day, regardless of where they happen to be, either in their offices or indeed, sadly, sometimes in toilets, to tell us what they think at that moment, very often what is lacking is an integrity of communication. So I really applaud the book and Henry's approach in describing as vividly as he does some of the issues that have brought us here. And in the context from where I speak, these issues are true as well, because as the pandemic rolls on, as we in Glasgow, because I'm speaking to you from Glasgow, attempt to define what the real outcomes of COP26 are going to be for our country, what we need are politicians who are honestly sharing with us what is possible and what is not possible. My second point is that patience may be required. Over 800 years ago, the Magna Carta Libertatum was drafted by the then Archbishop of Canterbury, a point I'm sure Ken Ross will have taken in. And when it was signed to curb the rebel barons and an oppressive king. A comparison can be made, I think, very easily between the rebel barons and indeed the roving bandits that Henry alludes to so clearly. So here we are, 8 centuries later, in different language, still grappling with some of the issues around the compact between society and our political elites. And whilst we don't have, in the same way as Henry is describing in his chapter, quite the same stark issues, we have issues around the mismanagement of public funds. So going back 20 years in Scotland, the beginnings of our Scottish Parliament were tainted, badly tainted, by the fact that there was mismanagement in public funds around the cost of the Parliament. So despite the new wind of democracy in Scotland, it became tainted by the fact that the preoccupation was around the cost overrun of the Parliament. And that continues till today, where there are concerns about mismanagement in terms of PPE for the COVID outbreak. And all of that, if there is mismanagement in either country, creates the loss of opportunity that Henry has described. And that is the brutal consequence of not respecting the public good in the proper application of funds. So to my final observation, and I honestly could have many more because I have found what I've read so stimulating, it is that societies crave leaders with integrity, grounded in values and principles, which are clearly published and underpinned and ensure policies which then flow are enacted through a democratic and open process, which is all about enhancing the public good. And at the moment in the UK, we are caught up with allegations that payments to a political party can ensure a seat in our upper chamber, our unelected second chamber. So if you pay enough money, you can get a seat. That was an issue which was at the forefront of political debate more than 100 years ago. We've not yet emerged from it. There are, of course, rules which exist to prevent such things, but political establishments seem always to be able to find a way to discover multiple back doors. I could go on, but I shan't because time is against us. But can I say in ending, Henry, I've always held you in the highest esteem, and that has frankly been enhanced by your contributions to Beyond Impunity. Thank you for that, and thank you to everyone else who has contributed to the book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Kubi, for those remarks. I am sure that this is quite an interesting, talk, and I can tell by the number of questions that are in the chat box. Now, we have only a few minutes to deal with these questions. I'll just read them. Henry, you see how you can address, the most important ones. There is a comment here which says, Dr. Chingaipe, I appreciate your talk. It's from the financial and economic perspective. But when you look at all that misspent money against the grinding poverty, how long do you think it will be before the patience of ordinary Malawians is spent? There's another one here which says, how does the law, constitutional law in action, align with support and promote roving political banditry values, interests, and normative systems? I have in mind presidential immunity, where in the recent past, it was cited as one of the obstacles to anti-corruption. The rather ineffective impeachment provisions, notwithstanding by Bingu's first term. And I'll just read the final one so you can respond, and then we'll get back to the other questions. There's another one which says, to what extent, if any, do you think the new president and the vice president have so far made any progress towards tackling the situation? Maybe let me give you a chance to provide your thoughts, to these interesting questions, Henry.
Thank you very much, Asiyati, for giving me the floor again, and also participants for raising questions. I have been typing and responding to some of the questions in the chat box. So for now, I will just speak to the ones that Asiyati highlighted. How long before patience is misspent? I think that patience is already running out. What got us to the motions of 2018 and 2019 was actually people running out of patience, because the situation at that time, people felt that could not continue, and so there was a lot of hope that the current president and vice president, in their togetherness, would actually do something about this. But we have had COVID Gate under their watch. We have had other reports of public finance mismanagement, and we are yet to see what their attempted actions will yield in terms of correcting the situation. As I speak, my crude view is that I think that people are also beginning to lose their patience 1 year down the line, because even the low-hanging fruits that it could have been plucked in the first year don't seem to have been plucked by the current leadership. Have they made progress? I think that they have made some progress, particularly in problem analysis. During the last 1 year, there has been a lot of work by different groups of people doing the analysis in terms of what is the problem, how does it pan out, and so on, and also putting on the table a whole menu of solutions that require now political decision-making to actually implement. And my crude view is that maybe they will get to the decision point soon, but it is rather too slow. So that's my view. In terms of the law aiding some of the impunity and the roving banditry, yes, there are some weaknesses in the law, and that's why in the set of recommendations I mentioned or suggest the institutional reform. So, for example, when you look at Parliament, Parliament is supposed to be making the budget. Now, just ask yourself whether our budgeting process is good enough, or it is, as one analyst has described it, theater. That's one issue. Look at how Parliament does oversight on public finance mismanagement issues. They will wait for the report of the Auditor General. Fair enough. What do they do with the report of the Auditor General? They talk about it. And when they have finished talking about it, they can only make recommendations. To who? To the Secretary, to Treasury, to the Minister of Finance. And these two will do nothing about the recommendations. So what? So can you strengthen that mandate by reviewing the mandate of Parliament under the law? Look at the anti-corruption bureau. They have their mandates, but speak to them. Look at the work they have done in the last few years and what they are suggesting in terms of improving their legal framework, gain more autonomy, to have more finances and a secured budget to do their work. You again see that there are areas that you need to tighten the law or improve on the law. Immunity of the president, yes, that is also a big problem. But I also think that there is a huge misunderstanding in this country about presidential immunity. My understanding is that the president should be immune for things that are within his scope of competence as a president. He has lawful mandate to do those things, and certain things are done badly or they deliver bad results. I don't think we should be suing people for working in that office and making tough decisions when we don't like the decision. But it is about protecting the president when he's doing something that is lawful, but is generating something that is certainly quarters of the population may not like. But show me the law that says we allow the president to steal as much as he can and he is immune from prosecution. There is no such a law. Asiyati?
Well, thank you very much, Henry. There are a lot of other questions that have come up, but maybe let me just read this one and so we wind up in the interest of time. There's someone here who is saying, can we say that some sections of the citizenry have had a role in fueling the culture of impunity and roving banditry? I have in mind demands by citizens for handouts during election campaigns where voters are more likely to support a party or candidate that routes to finance campaign handouts. And then finally, Henry, you spoke of a docile citizenry. Have you seen any change in the level of docility in recent times? Sir Andrew, how does the UK have a docile citizen in relation to government corruption? Very, very briefly, can you address these two questions? Very briefly. We only have a few minutes before we wind up.
Okay, so in terms of some sections fueling impunity and banditry, yes, but it's always shared. This is an issue that is rooted in our political culture, the culture that we developed after the transition to multi-party democracy in 1994, because we wanted to showcase that things have changed. This is the center, and we started showcasing bad things. So we started patronage in very bad ways, and we started patronage that actually speaks directly to the budget. I know that many people love the farm input subsidy program. I work on some input subsidy program from a political economy perspective, and every year I am beginning to doubt whether this is not just a patronage program that fuels unnecessary expenditure that achieves very little, if any results at all. We also started a culture of handouts. So the citizens demand, the politicians supply. So it's both elites and the masses together fueling this. So we need to find a way of dealing with this kind of political culture, and changing the law or just instituting a law is not going to do it, because that's not how you change culture. You don't legislate culture out. You have to do more than just legislating in order to get that cultural shift. Is there a change in citizens? Yeah, there has been a rise in citizen activism, except that it has been an urban phenomenon. 85% of our population are in the rural areas. If we could see similar activism at the level of the district, maybe we'll get development and good governance running at the second level of our governance arrangement. So it's an urban phenomenon, and as many of you will have observed, the engines of driving citizen activism have been a few people in civil society who, one by one, sometimes in groups, are being backed off from that civic space into the political establishment through cooperation. And so the civic space is shrinking because the key voices are being backed off from that, and they are joining the political establishment. So I think that we still have a long way to develop critical citizenship in the civic space.
Thank you very much, Henry. Sir QB, does UK have a docile citizenry? 1 minute.
Indeed. I would not say so. Membership of political parties waxes and wanes, and proportionately is less than it was decades ago. But we live in an era of single issue politics. So there is no doubt that groups of people come together around an issue without necessarily joining a mainstream political party, and they can then influence policy outcomes vividly, and that can range from rewilding issues in Scotland to the outcomes, as I mentioned, of COP26. And the second element of that, of course, is a free, voluble press, which shines light very often on areas that politicians do not wish to be exposed. So my reference earlier to payments for seats in the House of Lords is a very good example of where our free press has been very vigilant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Kibi. And at this point, unfortunately, we have to finish our discussion this afternoon. Very interesting. A lot of contributions from the audience. I would like to thank our two excellent speakers for their insights and perspectives. And they've given us much food for thought about mismanagement of public finances and also the issues of opportunity costs. And to the audience for your excellent and thought-provoking contributions. But I would also like to thank the teams of the Scotland-Malawi Partnership for their cooperation and mutual support, Craig and Jade for their wizardry with technical complexities of hosting such a webinar, and especially David Jones for his untiring diligence in ensuring this whole series is a success both in Scotland and Malawi. Let me hand over to David Jones, who is the Chief Executive of the Scotland-Malawi Partnership. David.
Thank you very much, Professor. And just a very few quick closing remarks from me. What a wonderful 60 minutes of, I hope, your day as well as mine. I thought it was incredibly insightful and brilliant questions and great discussion as well. I thought it was a bit of a shame when we got to Henry's recommendations that we rushed over that a bit because we were a bit short for time. So if you're happy, Dr. Chingaipe, it'd be wonderful to have your PowerPoint presentation. If you can email it to us, and we'll email that on to all attendees and put it on our website. We'll also put questions that we didn't manage to answer to our speakers, and if they're able to give a short written answer, and we'll again send that out to all who have attended. And that way, if your question hasn't been answered, don't give up, but do read the follow-up email in the next 24 hours or so. Thank you very much, of course, to both our speakers, as has already been said, but also to our excellent chair, who is one of the co-editors of the book, Associate Professor Asiyati Chiweza. So thank you very much, Professor. Thanks everyone for joining. I know we've got a lot right across Scotland, right across Malawi. I see in Texas and in The Hague, governance enthusiasts right around the world. I'm keen to remind you this is not the end of the discussion. This is only the end of the second of 8 webinars, and you can find information about all of those webinars on our website. I'll do a very quick screen share there. Just go to our website, events, upcoming events. It'll always be up there. And so you can see our next one is actually just in a couple of weeks. Mostly we're having them about the end of the month, but the next one, for obvious reasons, Christmas and New Year, is on the 15th of December. And that's 2 weeks and a day, 1 p.m. UK time, 3 p.m. Malawi time. We have Mr. Joseph Chunga, who's a research fellow at the Centre for Social Research at Chancellor College, but also Professor Robert Mattis, who I think was with us today as well from Strathclyde University. Professor Mattis is a co-founder of Afrobarometer, which I suspect all of us know and use and trust. We don't give full details, but we do give the date and time for our January one. Do keep that date free, 26th of January, 1 p.m. UK time, 3 p.m. Malawi time. We can announce here that it'll be Dr. Garton Kamchedzira from Malawi, and it'll be Lord Jim Wallace, the moderator of the Church of Scotland. Now, this is exciting because this is the day after the moderator gets back from a trip to Malawi. He will have been in Malawi the previous week and a little bit. So a great time to listen to his reflections as well. So perhaps, Craig, if you could put the poll up, and if you could just answer just these 2 short questions, that would be hugely useful for us. We take our reporting and monitoring requirements very seriously. And final thing to say is this is, of course, a webinar series framed around the excellent forthcoming book. And while we can't give a precise date, we can say it will be early next year that book will be coming out. And I'm sure by then you will be well enthused and excited about it, and we'll ensure that it's commercially available in both Scotland, Malawi, and internationally as well. But thank you very much for your time. I hope you can join us in 2 weeks, 2 weeks time. And thank you once again to both our chair and all of our speakers. It's sometimes nice at the end of the meeting to unmute and say hello if you hadn't had a chance, or goodbye. But thanks ever so much, everyone. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.